Hey, what's up, folks? James from Junkyard Fox. Thank you so much for joining me. And today we're going to have a very special guest. So, if you saw last week's special guest EDC Pocket Dump, you see my buddies Tyler and Shane out having an adventure in Utah, showing what they're carrying in their pockets. Sadly, Cuervo and I could not make it to that Utah adventure. We wanted to, but we couldn't. And they still took the time to film an EDC Pocket Dump for us. That was really cool on their part. And they still filmed a couple of extra videos. One of them was Shane making a step-by-step tutorial on how to make a primitive hand drill fire, and I think that's really awesome. Shane is very passionate about primitive fire and all that stuff. These are skills that I myself do not possess. I have trained under him for a little bit on making my first bow drill fire. I do have several videos. He's not new to the channel by any means. One time Cuervo and I camped with him in Arizona a couple years back, and we had a wonderful time. We camped with him and he taught us so many of his skills, and here he's going to show us once again a step-by-step tutorial on how to make a primitive hand drill fire. So big thank you to Shane for demonstrating that, and also big thank you to Tyler from TJack Survival for being the cameraman. So I'll have the links to their channels down below so you guys can check them out, and thank you so much. Let's get to it.
Alright, my name is Shane, and today we're going to be making a hand drill set. For those that don't know, a hand drill is a form of friction fire making that dates back tens of thousands of years. Quite simply, you're just taking one stick, spinning it into another stick, and that's how you make your fire. That hole was a bad example. Let's pop it in that one. So you're just going to be spinning the stick, the spindle into the fireboard, and that's how we make a fire. So I have another one of my Willow spindles that we're going to use for this, just make it easier so we don't have to find one for the video. A big chunk of cottonwood root. We're going to use this to make our fireboard. And then got a big handful of juniper bark. This will make our tinder bundle to blow our cold flame. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out a fireboard from the cottonwood root. I like my fireboards to be at least the length of my hand, so we'll bring it back to around here. Right, so we're going to turn this fireboard, or this chunk of cottonwood root, into a fireboard. I'll actually go ahead and just baton that down. Yeah, should be about good. Grain's pretty straight. So we're just going to take the knife and split it right down the middle, or as close to the middle as we can. Alright, so I'm going to pick one of these pieces to make the fireboard. They're about the same. I'll probably go with this one for now. So now I'm just going to shave the top down flat, then I'll shave the bottom flat as well. I like my fireboards to be about as thick as my finger, or a little bit thicker. Alright, that's starting to get there, so I'm going to go ahead and shape up the sides real quick, just to square them up. And right now all I'm doing is I'm checking for general thickness. I want it to be about the same the entire length of the board, so I don't have low spots, thin spots, stuff like that. When a cottonwood root is this light reddish brown, this is right about the perfect stage to make a fireboard with it. It can go a little bit lighter than this, but once it starts turning white, it's a little bit soft and spongy, and that's not ideal for a fireboard, in my experience. I think that'll probably be good. So before I do anything else, I'm going to set my fireboard off to the side, and I'm going to make a tinder bundle. So this is just the outer bark from a juniper tree. Juniper makes really good tinder. And this was just gathered here in this canyon that we're in a little while ago. So I've got a wad a couple feet long. So how I make my tinder bundles is I fold it a few times, and then I start to grind it together, kind of pulverizing it against itself. And this is just softening and loosening up the fibers. You can see all this dust coming out of the tinder. That means it's really good and dry. If it's not dusty, it's probably not going to be quite dry enough. And this is getting really nice already. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and get a strip out of my bark, and I'm going to wrap my tinder bundle. It's helpful for how I like to bring my coal to flame, waving in figure eights, which you'll see later on in the video, if everything goes right anyway. We don't want to wrap it too tight, otherwise it'll just want to smolder and not really burn that well. But we want it to be tight enough that it's going to hold everything together. I'm just tucking the bark through itself. You don't need to do anything fancy with it. So I've got it wrapped. So I'm going to take my thumbs and open up the middle. This is going to be what I call the target area. It's where the coal is going to go into. So as it is right now, a coal probably would burn and it would take, but I'm going to just add some of this fine material from the shmog right into that target area. Just going to lightly pack it in. And we do this over the shmog because otherwise this would just be lost into the sand. And that should be about good. So I'm going to set that off to the side and grab one of my chips of the cottonwood root, and we'll use it as a coal catch. It's just going to sit right under the board to keep the coal out of the dirt. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and start a new hole on this fireboard. To do that, we're going to take the knife and I pinch it on the blade, go about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch, and then just make a small round indentation in the board. It's going to be just big enough to accept the tip of the spindle. It doesn't have to be perfectly round shape or anything. That'll happen as we burn. So that's a good start. So there's 3 main stances you can use for a hand drill fire. One of which is simply pinning it down with your foot and working out in front of you. While this does work, it isn't my preferred stance because I don't really have any upper body weight going over the top. What I prefer instead is you can either kneel like you do with a bow drill, with one foot on the board and then you're leaning over it. I personally really like using a kneeling board. So just another fireboard or a stick or whatever. And that's just going to pin it down so I can be sitting right over the top. So I'm going to go ahead and take off my knife so it's not dangling around my neck as I go. And I'll go ahead and get this hole burnt in. Right now I'm using a technique called floating. I'm just keeping my hands in one spot on the spindle by moving one up and one down simultaneously. While I don't use floating a ton, I do like it to get the set warmed up. Once I start seeing smoke, then I'll make my pass. So now the spindle and the fireboard are mated together. You want to make sure it's the full diameter of the spindle that is burnt in, otherwise it might be hard to gauge how to cut your notch. When you're hand drilling, even in dry environments, it's always good practice to keep the burning end off the ground. That way there's no chance for it to absorb extra moisture. So to cut the notch, I bisect the hole so I find the middle point and I make a mark. My notch is going to go off to either side, almost to the center of the hole. It's good to keep your notches fairly narrow. If it's very wide, your spindle can basically ride right out the front, and then you have to start over. If it's too narrow, then the dust is all going to want to gather on top, and that's counterproductive. It's not going to help you. So trying to keep it at a happy medium, and that just comes with practice. So I went ahead and gave myself some guidelines going down the side of the board. I'm not going to make it any wider than this. And because wood is just layers, you could think of it like a stack of paper, pressing through and popping out chunks. And then once I think I have it deep enough, I check my notch. And to do that, I put the spindle in and look at it from the bottom. If I can see about 1/3 of the spindle, I know that my notch is cut deep enough. I'm going to make this just a tiny bit deeper, then I'll clean it up and we'll get a coal going. You'll notice as well that my notch is more of a square shape. You can do square notches or triangular. I like square notches a little bit better than triangular because you just get better contact with the spindle to the punk. So most of my notches are going to be pretty square. The last thing I'm going to do before we get started in making the coal is I'm going to take the spine of the knife. I'm going to rub it through the notch, and that'll help pack down and stuff in any extra fibers that are sticking out that would otherwise catch, make it kind of hard for the coal to release. So now I'm going to take my coal catch and put it right under my fireboard, right under that notch. I'm going to get myself into position. And we'll go ahead and spin out a coal. So I'm going to float until I get my first little wisps of smoke. And then once I do, we'll power down. Alright, so there's a little smoke. And there's a coal there already. I can tell because the dust pile is smoking on its own right out the front. Give it a little extra oxygen, show it coalesce. So I'm going to take my spindle and pump it in that hole, give it a little extra air. Learned that from one of my mentors, his name is Travis. I tap the back edge of the fireboard and start to tilt up, and that releases the coal. So now we can just take a second and breathe. It's not going anywhere. Coal this size will burn for a minute or two on its own. And get everything in position. So now I'm going to take the coal and transfer it carefully into my tinder bundle, making sure the tinder is close. I'm going to just drop it on in. And once it's in here, it'll start to just slowly burn and smolder. We can just take our time. Now, every time I get a tinder bundle with a coal in it fresh, I'll give it a few breaths, and then I'll start waving figure eights once it's catching. Alright, so it's caught pretty well. So in general, the more smoke you see, the harder you can blow, or in this case, wave. So I'm going to wave in a wide figure eight pattern, facing the mouth of the tinder bundle in the direction that my hand is going. And we have flame. So now if we had built a fire layer, or we're going to build a full fire, we'd go ahead and do that. But in this case, we don't need to. We're just going to let it burn out. Alright guys, so just as a recap, we just made a hand drill fire with a cottonwood root and a piece of seep willow for the spindle. Our juniper tinder bundle is burning nice and hot. We're just going to let that burn away. This is, in my mind, a very important skill for anyone wanting to learn true wilderness living skills. It takes nothing but a sharp rock to make a hand drill set. In our case, we use metal tools because we had them, but you don't need to, and that's the beauty of it. So thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you again in another video.